Hello friends, it's Shari. Today I have a really fun space-themed interactive card where we're going to integrate the Give It a Whirl into our card. I'm going to start with some ink blending, lots of ink blending on this one today, and I'm using some smooth surface Bristol cardstock. This I've cut a bit bigger than I need because I will trim it out with the stitch rectangle. We're making a Give It a Whirl card today, so I'm pulling out the circles for Give It a Whirl. This piece of Bristol is my background, and then I'm also going to cut a piece of Bristol with this largest stitch circle that is the base piece for the Give It a Whirl. I'll be doing ink blending on this as well as that rectangular piece. Now my original idea for this was to have a moon that is the Give It a Whirl that goes into our card. So I'm going to cut 2 of these moons using the full moon die from some sunflower cardstock. Now I'm taking the inside circle of the Give It a Whirl, which you need to cut 2 of as well, but I'm using this to cut my moon. And you can see that this is just slightly smaller than the 3-inch circle of the moon. So we're just trimming off that outer edge. And now I have a moon with those embossing little craters that will be the front of my Give It a Whirl. Now I'm going to do the same with this second moon. Now this is not going to be part of the piece that moves, but I want the circles to be exactly the same. For this second piece, I want to make it a crescent moon, so I'm going to use a circle die, which you could use the piece that goes with the Give It a Whirl, or I'm just going to pull out a 3-inch circle die, and I'm lining this up, and I will cut that inside piece. I'm kind of checking because this little mouse is going to sit on my moon, so I just want to make sure that I make this moon big enough. Once I have it where I want it, I'll hold it in place with some low tack tape, run that through my die cut machine, and now I have a crescent moon that will fit perfectly behind my full moon. Now I do need a second circle because we need to cut 2 of these, so I've cut one out of white cardstock. This one will go inside and you will never see it, so it doesn't need to be any kind of special paper. Now I need to cut my pieces for my Give It a Whirl. So this little connector you cut from some thin paper, like typing paper. And then for the pull tab, I'm cutting this from some reinforced cardstock. I am going to cut the little cover piece with the arrow from the same color cardstock because I will be putting an image on my little pull tab, so it really doesn't matter if it is contrasting because we're not even going to see the arrow. So I'm just going to put these pieces aside for right now, and we're going to do lots of ink blending. Now the color that I moved aside really quickly there was Salvage Patina. I am going to end up using that. I'm going to start in the center here, which you may think is kind of silly and pointless because I'm going to cut out the middle. But I did want to kind of make this whole nighttime sky or space sky to kind of work out my colors. So I have Salvage Patina in the center, then I use Peacock Feathers. Now I'm using some Uncharted Mariner, and you're going to see that I will grab a little piece of paper here to kind of keep those fingerprints from happening on the edge. Not that I'm too concerned about it because we are going to cut this out with the largest stitch rectangle, and I cut this piece larger than I need, but it's just going to keep my surface clean from my fingerprints. And then finally, I'm pulling in prize ribbon for that really dark blue. And you can see as I kind of work this in that a lot of that lighter color kind of gets covered up. And I think that this would be really nice even with a little bit of black soot on the outside. So let's trim this out with the largest stitch rectangle, and now I'm pulling out that full moon again, and I'm going to cut out the center of this. So the moon I don't really need, but what I want is that stitch detail. You could also use a 3-inch circle if you did not want the stitch detail for what I'm going to show you today. So I'll take my full moon and I'm just going to line this up so I can use the grid on my glass mat as a guide to make sure I have this in the center. And then once I have it where I want it, I'm just going to slide this off and run it through my die cut machine. So now I have this blue moon I can use for another project if I want. And I have this window with that stitching detail, and this is where the magic is going to happen. This window fits perfectly over top of that Give It a Whirl base piece. So now we need to ink blend this base piece to look like it is part of that background. So unlike the base piece that I did, and I started with light and worked my way out, I'm going to start with darker and work my way in because I need the edges to match my background piece, and then the center can be whatever I want. So I am now using some peacock feathers as I go towards the center, and finally I'll pull out that salvage patina and give it a nice light center there. So when you layer these together, they should match up. It still looks a little too light, so I'm going back to that Uncharted Mariner, and I actually pulled in that prize ribbon a bit more, and this will make them match a little bit. Look how much better that looks. Now I also wanted to do some ink blending on my moons. So this is sunflower cardstock, and now I'm using some fossilized amber to kind of give it some shading in that bottom and left side. To add even more detail to my moon shapes, I have some Wild Honey Distress ink and the Nighttime Sky stencil, which has those little openings to add those darker craters to the moon. And I pulled out a smaller blending brush because I felt like I had a little bit more control for those openings. I did one of the spots designs on the small crescent moon, and then I'm using the other one that has the larger spots on the full moon. And then I can go back along the edge with that fossilized amber brush, and it kind of fades them out just a little bit. Now that everything is ink blended, I wanted to add my gold splatters so that everything has the starry, shimmery look that we see in space. So I'm flicking my gold metallic watercolor off of a block to get some really tiny splatters. And I know you can't see this too well on camera as I splatter because I kind of moved my lights to the side so we didn't get any glare on the glass mat, but you can see where it's hitting that glass mat there. I'm pulling in the red gold for some bigger splatters by tapping my paintbrush. And then you're going to see here when I pick this up, I'll hold it in the light and you will see all that shimmer. Look at all those beautiful stars in our night sky. And then of course the inside circle matches as well. And then I wanted to add some shimmer to my moons. So I'm just trying to keep my little flecks of gold kind of along that shadowy area that I created with the stencil and the ink blending. And then I'll do the same for the crescent moon. And I can add some small splatters by flicking it off the block as well. I'm doing all my splatters at once because then I can just clean up my glass mat and all of that mess is done. So I'll set all of this aside and now we can work on the images for this card. I'm using the little mouse from You Autumn Know, and then I'm also using the planets and the spaceship, or rocket I should say, from Out of This World. I'm stamping these on some Nina Solar White cardstock with jet black ink so that I can do some Copic coloring of my images. And I'm going to pull in this card that I had created earlier because I liked the colors that I used for some of the planets and the rocket. So I'm just going to set this to the side as some inspiration for my coloring. I'm starting out with some toner grays for the body of the rocket. Then of course I have some red for those little fins on the rocket, which I think is really fun. I like that bright red color. I'll add a little bit of shading by pulling in a darker color. And then, of course, I am coloring the frame for the little window or porthole with a BG23. While I have this marker out, I am going to move on over to this planet that looks like Earth. So I'm coloring the oceans in that color, and then I'm pulling in a darker blue to kind of trace the outlines of those land masses. Now I can pull out some greens, and I'm going to do the same but kind of opposite. I'm going to trace the inside of the line and then blend it out with a lighter color. Planets are really fun to kind of try out some different color combinations and add textures. So here I'm adding some little dots to the ocean. And then I have this green fine line pen and I added some little hash marks. So hopefully you can see that texture that I added to that planet there. Now back to my rocket, I have a bright yellow for the top and the bottom. And then of course I need to color in the little window. And the color was a little too close to the color of the frame, so I just went over the frame again with that same Copic marker that I used and just darkened it up. For this little planet here, I'm using some purples. I colored in those craters or the spots with the dark one, added some shading towards the bottom, and then blended it out with the lightest purple color. You're going to see me do that on most of these. I have some pinks for this Saturn planet. I colored the darker color where I wanted some shading. Now I'm blending out with the lighter. And then you'll see me go back in with the darker and just add a little more shading. I felt like it was a little too light, so I pulled in a medium tone of pink there. And then I'll pull out a dark one and just trace the ring around the planet. Now for this big planet, I thought it would be fun to make this one two-toned. So two totally different colors versus the red planet and the purple one where I just use different shades of the same color. So this one is going to be some blue-greens and some YRs. So we have a pretty kind of yellow. I like this color because it's not very orange, it's kind of peachy colored. And I just thought that this was a fun color combination for this one. I like those kind of curvy, swervy lines on this planet. I think it's a lot of fun. And I'll go back in with that BG23 and color those other stripes. I had considered making this one 3 different colors, but then I thought it might be a little bit too busy, so I'm just going to stick with the 2. I am going to add some texture to this one, so you'll see me pull out an even darker color, and I'm going to go in and add some dots. And I like adding some bigger ones where I have space to do that. And then I'll do the same with the orange so that all of those stripes on that planet match each other. Now for my little mouse, I'm using the E70s because I just think that this is a really fun kind of brownish gray color. So it matches really well with all these pretty colors that I have going on with all the planets. I didn't want him to be gray like the rocket. I wanted him to be a little bit different, so that's why I'm going in with the E70s. And of course, I colored his shadows and then I blended out with the medium color and then the lightest. For his belly, I'm using some really pale browns. And then of course, I'll add some pink to his ears and his nose. And then finally, I have this last planet up here, and I just decided to go ahead and color this one purple. I'll use those 2 purple planets in 2 different corners of the card. Now, what you're not seeing is I also added some of the smallest planet that is in the Out of This World stamp set. It's just one circle with nothing else on it. It has no detailed lines. But once I started laying things out, I felt like I needed some really small things to kind of sprinkle around in my scene. Now let's put together the Give It a Whirl. So let me pull out my pieces that have dried up here, and we're starting with this little connector piece that is cut from that thin paper. We're going to fold it in half right where the score line is, and then we are adding adhesive to both sides of this, and I'm going to go ahead and just add it at the same time and then fold it back where I had folded it before. Now we want to take the back side of our moon piece, and we're going to line that fold of the connector piece right against that slit that is cut in the circle. Then we can take the back piece, now this is the one that's going to be completely hidden when our mechanism works, and we're going to line up the slits. And sometimes I feel like it's easier to do that when you kind of line them up and pull them apart and line up their straight edges. and then we'll stick that to the other side of the connector. So once I do this, I do want to make sure it's nice and burnished down, and I'm just doing that with my finger. We want to make sure that adhesive sticks nicely, and you can see there that side is connected and then this side is open. On the open side, we need to add our little pull tab. So I will just add a little adhesive on that kind of funny shaped piece down there. This fits perfectly right in the slit, right along the edge of the circle. And then even though we're not going to see the little decorative piece in the arrow, I am going to go ahead and attach it so that this is a little thicker since we're going to be pulling on this to turn the circle. But that rocket is eventually going to go right on that end of that pull tab. So now we can take this, flip it over, take our pull tab piece and thread it through the slot. And then we're going to work our circle around and get it working here. So that yellow circle is what's going to come through the hole and be on the front, and then the white circle is going to be on the back. And you can see here how that is going to turn, and I think it's looking really fun. So normally we take this circle and put it on the front of the card, but since I cut out this circle, the idea is to layer this behind it and make it look like it is integrated into that background. So I'm going to take out this moon and add my circle to the background first. In hindsight, I should have left it in there because once I put it back in the slot, I realized I was a little bit off and I had to pull my circle off and kind of recenter it, which was kind of ugly. So I left it out of this, but just learn by my mistake and go ahead and put that moon back in there when you glue this circle on. So I've just put a really thin line of glue around the circle, and here is why I say this. It's kind of hard to see where it's lined up. Once you get it over there, it could be shifted just slightly to the left or the right, and you really couldn't tell. I even held this up to the light, which you're going to see me do here, hold it up to the light, and I was looking, and it looked pretty centered to me, but once I got the moon in there, I could tell it was just slightly off. So I kind of pried it apart with my little spatula tool up there, put the moon back in, and re-glued it, and now I think it looks great. It's nice and centered. So now that I have my backer piece on there centered and glued down, I'm going to pull my full moon out so I have a nice flat surface to work on. And I want to add my elements inside the circle. So these are the things that will be revealed when we spin the circle out of the way. So we're putting our crescent moon, which will match the moon on top. And I use liquid glue to make sure all those little points and everything are glued down so that there is nothing for the circle on top to get caught on as it moves. We'll add the little mouse that we colored earlier, and you will see I'll add a little more glue to its paw later because it did catch my moon on the top. And then I want to add a sentiment. So I'm just adding the sentiment from the Out of This World set that says, "Shoot for the stars." So I've just lined up that sentiment between the moon and the slot. I'll pick that up with the door of my MISTI, and I'm inking this up with some VersaFine ink. I like to use this ink when I'm stamping on a very inky background like this. Next up, I wanted to add some stars, so I have pulled out the Superstar stamp set just for this little shooting star, and I am going to stamp this right above my little mouse. I just think that's so fun right above his head. There is also a small star and a large star in the Out of This World stamp set, and I'm going to stamp some of those around as well. And right now I'm just focusing on that center circle that is going to be revealed when we whirl the moon out of the way. I'm adding some gold metallic watercolor to my stars so they shimmer. And now I've placed all of my planets around where I want them to be, and I'm just picking each one of them up and I'm adding them with a little bit of liquid glue. You can see there, this is where I added those little tiny planets that are part of the Out of This World set, just to have some more colorful planets floating around my moon. I am adding a couple of these to where they go off of the side of the panel, and then I'll just trim them off, and I think this is a fun way to kind of make this look like an expansive space scene. So this little red one here, and then that big planet at the bottom, just trimming off the edge ever so slightly. Now to add some more stars around my planets, I'm using those same stars from Out of This World with that VersaFine ink, and I'm doing the same thing that I did in the center, just kind of sprinkling those stars around. And this really starts to fill the space and fill this card. For these, I will, of course, add that metallic watercolor so I have those shimmery stars. And this is really starting to make this card pull together. So you'll see here in a minute when I am done, I'll pick this up and move it in the light and you'll really see the shimmer that this metallic watercolor creates. Look at those shimmery stars. So now to put my full moon back into place, I'm just going to feed that through the slot and my moon is moving nicely. It was catching on the hand of the mouse, so I'm just adding a little dot of glue to make sure that is glued down perfectly. And then there's nothing for my full moon to catch on. Now I can flip it over and we want to add the thin foam tape around the circle just like we do when we're putting this on the front of a card. So I'm going to use that stitch line of that circle piece as my guide where this foam tape goes. And we're basically making a pocket for this circle to spin around in. It takes 2.5 of these thin foam strips to go around the circle. And I find that it is much easier to bend these around the circle if I go ahead and pull off that liner paper. So that's what you're seeing me do here. Pull off that liner paper and it's much easier to curve. Now, because this is a full panel and we're going to put this on a card, we need to put foam all over the rest of the back. So I'm putting foam on all 4 sides and filling in these corners around the circle. This will have the whole panel popped up onto my card base. So I'll just remove all those liner papers and flip this over, and we're going to line this up with a standard size card base. And now we have this really fun Give It a Whirl integrated into the front panel of our card. Of course, I need to add my rocket to my pull tab, which is a really fun little detail, and I'm pointing it in the direction that it should be turned. Finally, I need to add some glitter, so I'm adding my Stardust Stickles to all my planets and the window of my rocket, and then I'm going to let this sit and completely dry. I want to make sure that I don't play with it while that glitter dries because I don't want to accidentally hit any of it. And then once it is all dry, here is that finished card. And you turn the rocket, and that full moon turns out of the way to reveal the crescent moon with the little mouse and the sentiment. And I just think that this is so much fun. Also, have you noticed that the moon looks like cheese and there's a mouse sitting on it? Yep, that wasn't a mistake. That's kind of on purpose. I really had a lot of fun creating this card and figuring out a new way to incorporate the Give It a Whirl into a card. I hope this has inspired you to give it a try and maybe make some moon cheese of your own. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye!